Hey, y'all. Welcome to another edition of Three and a Possible. I'm Monica Rhodes, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to this new video series. As we know, histories are often multi layered, and the name of this show is certainly no exception. If you are a spades player, then you know this is the phrase you would use when you are predicting how many books you have in your hand. Three and a Possible also represents the essence of cultural preservation, which is not just a conversation with the past, but one that concerns the future as well. Three and a Possible and preservation is predicted. Through this series, I will be chatting with experts in the preservation space, asking three and possibly four questions per interview. This is a free flowing discussion with my community of practice and people that I call friends. So, without further ado, I'd like to kick the conversation off with Teddy Pierre. And Teddy, I want to start with asking you a question related to what is your area of specialty? Where do you focus your practice?
My practice, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this really very momentous occasion with you. This is really quite interesting, and I think it will serve the preservation cause in a very deep and profound way. My area is that I've come to specialize in is I am a defender of the low fired brick. And in New Orleans, it is in this region of the world, we call it the soft red brick. It is it has been wounded many times. It's a very favorite of the folks in this area because of its color and its texture as a brick. But it is a very porous brick. It was always intended when it was originally used to be when it was on an exterior application. It was always intended to be used with conjunction with a lime-based plaster as a covering because it is not a very durable brick. But some of the abuses of this brick are applications of um, elastomeric paint. That is a major crime to slap elastomeric paint on this brick because the brick and the mortar work in concert to breathe. And the elastomeric paint does exactly what it's designed to do. It cuts off air and water from either going in or out of the brick surfaces. The second uh, 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 major assault on this brick is the use of Portland cement based repointing mortar when you've got a wall of low fired brick. And what that does is it makes the mortar joints harder than the brick, and it also makes the mortar joints impervious. The Portland cement based mortar does not allow the moisture that accumulates in the brick, and again, in an exterior application, does not allow that moisture to migrate out through the mortar joint as it was designed. The mortar joint is supposed to be sacrificial, which means that over a period of time, the mortar joint would uh, have to be maintained. You'd have to break out and repoint the mortar joint every 50 years or so. But so therefore, what happens is the water migrates through the brick, and it causes the brick to become eroded, and in some cases, uh, completely destroyed.
So,
So
so Teddy, if I'm clear, just looking, I have a photo up. So, what's happened at the top right with
yes,
the brick damage there? That's from improper repointing, and it
yeah,
also looks like Yeah, yeah, that brick is damaged from severe water damage.
That is correct. And what happens, especially a locale like New Orleans with a high water table, and that's not the water table is not at the same height year round, but in the springtime, and when you get a combination of high water table and a torrential downpour of rain, what happens is that brick, which is like a sponge, it's subject to um, uh, the um, um, the water gets sucked up like a sponge.
So the capillary rise, capillary.
Reaction. That is correct. It actually it actually counteracts gravity, and it goes up as high as it wants to go. And what happens is that that moisture has to go somewhere, and the moisture tends to want to go outside. So what happens outside of the brick and the mortar? But if it can't go through the mortar joint, it goes through the brick, and that's what that. So my my passion is to save these soft red brick. That's what
And
I
then
do.
and then what's your other passion, Teddy?
Pardon me?
I said, what's your other passion?
Oh, haha. Uh, my other passion is to do, put into action some of my dream projects, which would bring the whole concept of preservation to a new level when it comes to education, as it relates to education, both to very young people, you know, attempting to get them interested in becoming, perhaps becoming architectural craftsmen or becoming professional preservation professionals in organizations that regulate uh, preservation in various communities, i.e., the the Vucare Commission or the Historic District Landmarks Commission or whatever that commission may be called within certain historic districts, because this historic preservation is extremely important to the architectural life of America.
Absolutely. So Teddy, where we met, and this was a few years back, and for those who are watching, if you remember the interview with Jason Church and down in Louisiana, we all worked on a project together in New Orleans at the John Lafitte National Cemetery in Chalmette as a
Correct.
part of New Orleans Jazz. So Teddy, we met through our connections in cemeteries, and I know you've been working in that space for about 25 years now.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your work in and around Louisiana?
Well, the cemetery that carries the greatest number of my completed project, which is at this point the count is 29 completed projects, is actually in a little town called Thibodaux, Louisiana, which is about an hour and 15 minutes or so southwest of New Orleans. And what these folks did was they got my name through an organization called the Preservation Resource Center here in New Orleans, which referred me to these folks. And we started a relationship back in 2013. And what they would do is they'd call me and say, "Well, look, Pierre, we've raised some money. What we'd like for you to do is come in and evaluate these 12 cemetery plots of various types and with various needs. And what we'd like for you to do is to give us an idea of what it would cost to restore these 12 plots, these 12 structures." And I'll give them the work up the numbers, and they would say, "Okay, we have X number of dollars, so we'll take three of those at a time," because I think they had a budget limit of about maybe $15,000,
Okay.
and we would do three of them at a time. And when I would be complete with those three, I would then move on to the next three, or until they could raise some additional funds. Well, like I said, I've done 29 29 projects so far, and they've got others lined up ready for me to work on. And they vary all the way from a complete restoration, meaning the building was in deplorable condition. It was really falling apart. Or there are times when I've cleaned structures that had been just completely invaded with what I call biomass, which is
Okay.
I call it biomass. What it is, it's a combination. It's a colony of biological agents, algae, fungus, and algae, fungus, and other elements, dirt, and what have you. And what I do is I use a product that, and of course, it's not bleach, because bleach is a no-no in the preservation world, especially
Well,
as it
yeah.
relates to marble, and especially engraved marble. Yes, yes. What do you want to say?
Well, what about power washing, Teddy? If I wanted to put a high power wash, uh,
Absolutely. Uh, the recommendation is to get a power washing. If you want to use a power washer, you have to gear it down to no more than 200 psi.
and then
The
what product what do you use to remove biological growth?
I use a product called D2 Biological Solutions.
Okay.
It's used all over the country, highly recommended, approved by the Park Service, and so on. It's a very, very good product. Now, D2 is, again, it's not like bleach because it doesn't give you an instant clean. It takes several applications of this material, of this agent, to give you the clean that you want. But I can get, it takes about 2 weeks to a month to get to work in the way that it works. You have to put it on, you do a little brushing with I use a Tampico or a natural fiber brush, natural bristle brush, and scrub it real good, and then I let it dry. Then I hit it again, and then rinse it again. And before I leave for the day or for a period of time, I will hit it with another application of the D2. And they recommend you can cut the D2 um, almost 10 to 1, but I only go 50-50. I go 1 to 1.
Yeah. Well,
D2 and water.
so one of the things, Teddy, that when we worked together, that when we were down in New Orleans together, one, I appreciated all the food places you introduced me to in the restaurants. And the other thing that I appreciated is when we, walked around a cemetery, Lafayette #2, we talked about the histories of benevolent associations. So
Yeah,
could you say a little bit more about your work around those associations?
yes. I got involved with a cemetery in New Orleans. It's a city-owned cemetery owned by the city of New Orleans. It's Lafayette Cemetery #2, and it it had been long neglected. And in descriptions in tour guide books, they always described it as a horrible graveyard, unkept graveyard. But I got involved because I discovered that there were 20 structures within that cemetery, um, all except two that were totally abandoned, that were built and owned by African American benevolent associations. Now, the African Americans weren't the only ones with benevolent associations, but this was of special interest to me. Well, I'm an African American, number one. Number two, um, because it had not been given um, the proper airing within the community about its significance. They came about in the 1880s and on into the turn of the century, about the 19 teens. And these benevolent associations came up in response to the fact that the hospital situation in New Orleans was segregated. And now segregated, but they barred black people from going to the hospital. So what these black folks did was they got together and started an organization that and they were actually doctors and lawyers and other professionals, in addition to day laborers and what have you, who formed these organizations called benevolent associations. You got two things if you were a member of a benevolent association. While you were alive, when you got sick, there was an organization that basically took care of you.
Hmm.
They weren't necessarily doctors, but they would come to they were sick room attendant kind of thing. They would take care of your biological needs. They would keep you fed and so forth. Make sure you took your medications. If you got a prescription from a doctor, you'd hand that prescription to the organization and they would pay for your medications. Now, when you died, that's when things really got interesting. When you passed away, you had a very dignified procession for a funeral, which included a brass band. And the brass band feature was something that was actually brought over from Africa. It was part of an African tradition and is still practiced today in parts of Africa. Well, this brass band thing, the way it worked was there were two parts to this procession. The dirge, which was a slow, very contemplative, very deep, mournful kind of uh, uh, musical selection. And then at some point, when the body was, as they called it, cut loose, meaning the body was placed in the final interment spot, then there was an upbeat that occurred. There was the first line in the processional was of the mourners, the relatives of the person who died, and friends and family and so forth. But then there was a second line, and that second line was the folks who responded. They were the people from the streets who knew what was going to happen. They could anticipate that the brass band was going to tune up and up and turn the tempo up, and there would be dance music, and there would be a party in the middle of the street, walking down the street. So you got that as part of your dues that you paid in the benevolent association.
Okay.
So it followed you from the not from the necessarily from the cradle to the grave, but from the time when you were not ill, from the time you were through the time you were ill, the time you passed away, and then on into your next life. That's what the benevolent association. Well, there's one there's I'm working right now with one of those organizations. Of those 20 structures in Lafayette number 2, there's only 2 that are currently being used. The others have been abandoned. The benevolent associations have disbanded. It is the one that is still current is the Young Men Olympians. They are the oldest continually operating benevolent association in the state of Louisiana and the second oldest in the United States of America. It is also the oldest second line club in the city of New Orleans. As a result of what has been done with this second line and the music that was played, the street music, it was one of the roots of jazz.
Hmm.
Jazz notable jazz musicians, Louis Armstrong, Buddy Bolden, and others, claimed that as young people, young children, they were influenced, their musical sense, the musical sense of making notes and,
Hmm.
and being and 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 moving people came about as a result of what they heard from these brass bands that played for these jazz funerals. So therefore, the the basis for the one um, cultural contribution that America has made to the world, which is jazz, born right here in New Orleans, the roots are very much attached to the benevolent associations in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Wow. Wow. And so Teddy, thank you for, this, I mean, for sharing the history of these very important institutions. I am a huge fan of cemeteries, and what I often tell people, like if you want to understand a community, a society, look at how they treat their dead and their burial practices. Um,
Amen.
and they leave so much behind. And so benevolent associations, these beautiful architectural traditions, also demonstrate a continuity of activism. It's like we couldn't have
Yes,
uh,
yes,
the hospitals, we couldn't, have our own cemeteries, but we will collectively decide this is how we want to bury ourselves as a group with dignity, and have craftspeople based in New Orleans be a part of building that tradition
yes,
of cemetery architecture.
that is
So
absolutely correct.
yeah, so I think there's often a missed opportunity to see the beauty in architectural traditions that are in spaces that some would consider spaces of mourning.
There's a point I want to make, and then we can move on to the next question.
Sure.
There was a time in the city of New Orleans where 4/5 of the African American population were members of at least one benevolent association. Of
You said four
African,
fifths, four fifths.
4/5. And there was a cemetery in the city of New Orleans where there were 100 of these structures that were built by independent African American benevolent associations. But that cemetery was demolished in 1957. All right.
Hmm.
Now, therefore, by default, Lafayette Cemetery No. 2 holds the largest collection of these structures anywhere in the United States of America. So, what one of my passions, you asked about my passion, is to have these structures. Every one of them is in the need of attention, structural attention, maintenance, and that sort of thing. But everyone to have them regarded as monuments and have them qualified to get funds uh, uh, appropriate to their 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 restoration. So that is one of my passions. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and so Teddy, now that we started there, how did you get into the work that you're doing now? Like, what was your path into this field?
Strictly through my father. My dad in 1972 was given an award by the local chapter of the AIA, local chapter of the American Institute of Architects, as Craftsman of the Year. And it was an award that was not given annually, it was only when merited. I was my father's, I'm junior, so I carried his name. He was my hero. He was he was a phenomenal man. He had so much respect from architects, from general contractors, from owners who insisted that Teddy Pierre be their masonry contractor on their job. People would wait for him for months and sometimes years to have him work on their job. And I saw all of this. I started from the age 12. My dad brought me out on the job with him. And I just absolutely absorbed the whole concept. And from the time I was 12 years old, actually, before I was 12, I just knew that this is something that I wanted to do. Yes, I wanted a university degree. I wanted a college education, absolutely. But I also wanted the combination of the architectural craftsmanship in my hands. My grandfather was an architect, was a craftsman. He was a wheelwright and a blacksmith.
Okay.
So craftsmanship was a part of my family's life for many many generations. And before him, his father, my great grandfather, was also a blacksmith and a wheelwright. So I just knew that I did not want to ignore and just I had to be involved in this architectural craftsmanship field, and my dad was my portal to do that. If,
Yeah. And
if
then, Teddy, when we were hanging out, you also mentioned that you went to Tulane as well.
the day I graduated from Tulane University, I was the third African American to graduate from Tulane with a degree in architecture from that institution.
Okay.
But that day, in the graduation was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Hmm.
That morning, my father got me up and he said, "Let's go to work." So we now
No, there's no celebration, no vacation.
no, but look, here's the deal.
Right into it. Right
Realized
into
what was happening. He wasn't punishing me.
it.
He was
Yeah.
making a point. We didn't even go anyplace. I didn't even get dirty that day.
Hmm.
We drove around and we talked and so forth, and we went to look at job sites and we evaluated job sites and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The time we spent on the day that and it was a big deal. It was a big deal in my family. It was a big
Yeah.
deal to me. It was a big deal to my dad, to my mother. It was a big deal.
Well,
But
Teddy, I'll say your father was spot on in getting you right out into the field because when we started this call, you were picking up some materials for the crew, and so that work has not stopped since you started.
I'm at 71 years old. I have no intention of stopping. The only thing that will stop me is if my body quits. That's the
Yeah.
only thing that would stop me. And right now, I'm fighting I'm a stage 4 prostate cancer sufferer. Well, I'm winning. I'm winning the battle because I'm still
Okay.
working. I'm working. I'm laying bricks.
Yeah.
I'm supervising my guys. I have a guy I'm training to be a craftsman.
Yeah.
Now,
And
and
Teddy,
do
so
even more.
so speaking of training, so that's how we met on a hands-on preservation experience project in New Orleans that was focused in on training community members and getting them involved in restoring historic cemeteries. And the work that you're doing now is all about training. Can you speak a little bit to what you're doing and the importance of that work?
The name of the project is Pierre Parlante. And yes, my name is Pierre, but my name Pierre translates into Peter, and Peter translates into stone or rock. And parlat is French for speaking. So it's the speaking stones. That is the translation of our organization. And what we're doing is we're taking Lafayette Cemetery No. 2 and we're trans we're transforming it into an educational landscape. We're taking every aspect of that cemetery and we're breaking it down into what I call portals of discovery and exploration. And we're making it available to local teachers to take students through that cemetery and bring them to an understanding of what is happening here. These building materials, where did they come from? How did they relate one to another? The history of this site. For example, there is an inscription. This is just one example on one of the marble uh, t- uh, uh, tablets on one of the tombs that says this person was a native of Prussia. So you go back and you study, what is Prussia? Well, Prussia used to be a nation. It started in 1525, but it was decommissioned in 1947. But it was the Prussian mentality that brought what was formerly German tribes that wound up making a German nation. So again, if you're a teacher and you hear about Prussia, you take your students through a way of saying, "Oh, okay, this is the way this nation was formed. It's very different from the way the United States of America was formed." And then you say, "Well, why would somebody come from Prussia all the way to New Orleans?" Prussia, there were mountains. They had a change of seasons. They had all cultural activities and what have you. Well, because there were influences. There was the Little Ice Age, which influenced the agricultural community in those countries. There were famines. There was the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, it goes on and on and on. All of this is related. Why was there immigration to this place, which was the filthiest city in the country in the 1850s? Full of malaria and people throwing sewage out into the streets. The people came here because they could get something to eat. They could go, they could farm, they had other options, and they had religious freedom and that sort of thing. So those are the kind of points we want to make, and there are many many others within the bounds of that one square block, that much maligned cemetery. It has much to say. If all you got to do is dig a little, do a little bit of digging, a little bit of investigation, and you can become very much educated about many, many aspects of life in this city and in this country.
Yeah. All through cemeteries. And I really like your term, portals of discovery, which leads me to, my last question for you, Teddy, is, we're often talking about the future of this work, even though we are working on historic buildings and places. But what, from your perspective, should people more broadly, because this field is so expansive, right? It's
Yeah,
the attorneys, it's the architects, it's the craftspeople, it's the planners, it's the politicians, it's the funders. It's a big world. But from your unique perspective in working with the materials, what should we be thinking about? What we should be focused on for the future of our work?
number one, we need the craftsman community has been remiss at trumpeting what it means to be a craftsman, and the the rewards that come to you when you see a project that my dad used to say, you know, anybody can order a pile of bricks and a few sacks of mortar and some cement and some sand, but it takes a craftsman to be able to take those very same elements, put them together in a way that is special, that is admired, that that serves a purpose, as both aesthetic and practical. It takes a craftsman. I think one of the main things we need to do is to start with the youngest of our students and begin introducing them to the very basics of what it is. Well, for example, if you ask students, where do bricks come from? They're most likely to say from Home Depot. And I like to be able to let you know, no, they come from the earth. They come from clay. You dig the ground, and there's certain things you have to do with the clay, and that's where it starts. it's a broadening. There's a broadening. You mentioned earlier in the setup to the question, broadening of your thinking about this. One of the things we're doing with this project is with these students um, and their teachers. We want the teachers to develop lesson plans based around geography, geology. You know, there are three different types of stone that are represented in that cemetery: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Metamorphic is marble, sedimentary is flagstone and slate, and igneous, of course, is granite. Okay, there, they got examples of all of those right there in the cemetery. So you start digging just a little bit. You could do lectures about all of that. Then you start talking about history. Oh Lord, it goes on and on and on. There are so many portals.
Yeah. I mean, even the question Teddy to ask, like, well, who made the low-fired bricks? What was that process like? You know, in the 18th.
1865, you know who made the low fire brick.
Yeah. Yeah.
George,
But
George
but
Anesthesia and mine made
but
those low
but do
fire.
students know? Do students know? Like, do they know what that
Oh,
process is and understanding, the
not even,
history?
not even my own youngest relatives have any clue because they're not. It's not being taught,
Yeah.
and it's partly my fault. I need to teach them. I'm doing that within my family right now. That's where we start with our families, with our small groups, church groups, sororities and fraternities. We need to become a great deal more aware of who we are and from whence we've come. That's what I. That's
Well,
not.
well said, Teddy. Well said. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, I know I caught you right in the middle of a job, and you
Hey,
stepped into a closet for me, Teddy. I appreciate you.
I make time for you anytime you need me. Just call me.
I know I can, and I know when I'm down in New Orleans, we're going to get some crawfish. So
Some
be ready.
gumbo, some gumbo.
Oh, you want some gumbo? I'm
Over,
I'm gonna go for the crawfish. I'm gonna go.
over. We got or soft shell crab. We can get some soft shell crab.
All right, we can do that. We can do that.
Ah,
Okay. Well, thank you again, Teddy. And for all that are watching, please tune in next week. We will have Mr. Jim Turner who is a window restoration expert and also a dear friend. So I look forward to seeing
was
y'all. Please keep the
he
questions going. Oh, what's that, Teddy?
was he at Tuskegee? Did he do the
Yeah,
Tuskegee?
yeah. Jim was there when we did that project.
Because I was a presenter at Tuskegee as
Yeah,
well.
I
This
remember that.
year, Tuskegee's going to have a degree program in preservation.
I heard we had Quasi on earlier, who's the chair of the
Oh,
department, Dr.
I,
Daniels.
I love him. I love that man. He is so wonderful.
Yeah, he's solid. So yeah, so Jim will be on next week. So for y'all, please tune in. We'll learn a little bit more about the trades world.
Thank you for this
And
opportunity.
yep, and then also please feel free to connect with Teddy online. So with that being said, thank you for tuning in, Teddy. Thank you so much, and everyone have a great afternoon and or rest of your morning.
Thank you.